Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
At 21, I'm dealing with more medical issues than most people twice my age. I'm deaf, which means I rely on hearing aids to catch even bits of conversation. On top of that, I'm chronically ill and immunosuppressed, so getting sick isn't just inconvenient, it can be genuinely dangerous. My muscles and joints are weak enough that I need a walking stick to get around, and sometimes I just faint without warning. It's not the life I imagined for myself, but it's the hand I was dealt. I've learned to navigate the world with these challenges. I wear pins on my jacket and bag that clearly state I'm deaf, hoping it might save me from awkward misunderstandings. Most days, people are kind enough. Some are curious, a few are ignorant but harmless, and then there's the occasional person who makes me question humanity entirely. Today was one of those days. I was sitting at the train station waiting for a train that was running almost half an hour late. The platform had maybe 10 other people scattered around, all of us looking equally miserable in the rain. The station still required masks, which was important but made everything feel even more suffocating. I had one hearing aid in so I could hear if anything important happened, and an earphone in my other ear so I could listen to music and zone out. I wasn't paying much attention to anyone around me. Why would I? I was just trying to pass the time like everyone else. Then something hit the ground right in front of me with a thud. I looked down to see a child lying face down at my feet, crying loudly enough that even my hearing aid picked it up. Before I could process what was happening, a woman was in my face, screaming. I couldn't make out what she was saying with her mask on, so I tried to explain that I'm deaf. She kept shouting, completely ignoring me, until finally she pulled her mask down. She immediately accused me of tripping up her kid. I told her I hadn't done anything of the sort. She pointed at my walking stick, which was propped against the wall where I'd left it when I sat down. It hadn't moved an inch. I pointed out that it was against the wall and there was no way her kid had fallen over it. She asked if I was calling her a liar, then insisted she'd just watched her kid run over and trip over my stupid walking stick. Then she launched into this whole rant about how entitled we teenagers are. I'm 21, but apparently that doesn't matter, and how we have no respect for our elders. She accused me of lying about being disabled, saying I was just pretending for attention or sympathy or whatever she thought I'd gain from it. I've heard this before. People see a young person with a walking stick and assume it's fake, like I'm playing dress up with medical equipment for fun. So I just let her talk while her kid, who'd apparently recovered from his traumatic fall, stopped crying and went back to chasing pigeons around the platform. When she finally took a breath, I asked her why her child was running around on the platform. She said it was because he was bored, and they'd been waiting for half an hour with nothing to do. I told her he shouldn't be running around because it was dangerous. She snapped back, telling me not to tell her how to parent her child. Her kid was fine, she'd gotten her yelling out of her system, and I could go back to ignoring the world. I went to put my earphone back in. Big mistake. She demanded that I give her son my earphones if I was so concerned about him running around. I wanted to tell her that I didn't really care what her kid did since he didn't faceplant in front of a train, but I kept it simple and told her no, I wouldn't be giving her my earphones. I said a firm goodbye and went to put the earphone back in. That's when she reached out and snatched it from my ear. Except it wasn't just my earphone. Because she grabbed so roughly, she also yanked my hearing aid right out of my ear. It hurt. Really hurt when something gets ripped out like that. Before I could react, she grabbed her kid's hand and took off running down the platform with my hearing aid in her fist. I chased after her, shouting for her to stop and give it back. But without my hearing aid, I couldn't hear anything she might have been saying. She ran to the end of the platform, then turned and sprinted back the other way. I considered just grabbing her or blocking her path, but hesitated. That hesitation cost me. She got past me, went straight to my walking stick leaning against the wall, grabbed it, and threw it onto the tracks. I watched my 40-pound walking stick land on the rails and felt my blood boil. She was standing there saying something to me, but I couldn't hear a word. I started swearing at her, loudly, not caring who heard. She was holding a hearing aid that would cost a few £100s to replace if she broke it, and she just destroyed my walking stick like it was nothing. A man nearby saw what was happening and tried to help by speaking to her, but I had no idea what anyone was saying. Then a train station employee arrived, and thank God she knew sign language. I explained everything to her in sign language so the woman couldn't interrupt. The employee immediately took control. She made the woman give back my hearing aid and provided me with antibacterial wipes to clean it. Someone was sent to retrieve my walking stick from the tracks, which delayed the train another 10 minutes. Security came and removed the woman from the station while she screamed and shouted the whole time. The woman claimed she didn't know it was a hearing aid and asked how she was supposed to know I was actually deaf. It didn't matter. Even if it had been just an earphone, she'd still stolen my property. She received a lifetime ban from that train station. If that's where she lives, she'll have to drive to another town just to catch a train. If not, she'll never be able to stop there again. Hours later, my ear still hurt from where she'd ripped the hearing aid out. The audacity of that woman was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, but at least I got my hearing aid back, and she got exactly what she deserved. I grew up hearing stories about my grandmother who passed away before I was born. She left my grandfather all alone in their old family house. He had 3 sons who helped him through everything. My dad was the youngest of the 3 brothers. Eventually, my grandfather moved out of the family house and into a small mobile home with help from his sons. Things were okay for a while. Then, about 10 years later, my middle uncle went through a messy divorce and moved in with my grandfather to help him out and save money. They lived together for a bit, but then my uncle suddenly died from liver problems. It hit my grandfather hard. He became severely depressed and lonely. Sitting in that mobile home was nothing but memories and silence. My dad felt terrible seeing him like that. He kept trying to think of ways to cheer him up. One day he got an idea. Why not get him a pet to keep him company? Animals are great for that sort of thing. My dad talked to one of his neighbors and found out her cat had just had kittens. She had 4 of them total. She decided to keep one for herself and was planning to give the other 3 away to good homes once they were old enough to leave their mother. My dad asked if we could have one for my grandfather. The neighbor was happy to help out and said yes right away. So it was settled. We were getting a kitten for my grandfather. In December of 2019, we brought him his new furry companion. The bond between them was immediate. It was like the cat could understand English when my grandfather talked to him. We named the cat Charlie. Watching them together was heartwarming. My grandfather finally had something to care for again, something that needed him. When summer came around during the pandemic, we started letting Charlie outside little by little. He got used to the small neighborhood and loved exploring. He never wandered far though, always staying close to the mobile home. That Saturday, I asked my dad if we could visit my grandfather and see Charlie. He agreed and drove me over, but he couldn't stay because he had to work. One of his co-workers was on vacation, so he was covering their shift. He dropped me off and headed to work. My dad and I were planning to get our own cat soon too. I went inside and greeted my grandfather. We decided to let Charlie outside for a bit. The weather was nice. We sat on the porch together, and my grandfather started telling me stories about what his life was like back in the 1940s. I loved hearing those stories. Charlie was laying on the grass facing the street, perfectly content. Everything was peaceful. Then I noticed 2 people walking down the sidewalk. They started getting closer to the driveway. A woman and a little boy, maybe 8 years old. The kid got excited when he spotted Charlie and pointed at him, calling out about the kitty. My grandfather greeted them and told them they could pet the cat, but I needed to wear a mask first. He explained he was 83 and it's high risk for getting sick, so we were being careful. The woman said they didn't have any masks with them and asked if they could still pet the cat anyway. I spoke up and explained again that my grandfather was 83 and high risk, so without a mask they needed to leave. I added that a lot of people around here were high risk and they needed permission to be on this property. She snapped at me to shut up and told me not to talk to my elders like that. Then she turned to her son and told him he could go pet the cat. My grandfather raised his voice and told her she needed to leave immediately or he would call the police. But then she did something that made my blood run cold. She told her son to take the cat, and that it was his reward for having to deal with us jerks. I shouted and asked what she thought she was doing, demanding they give Charlie back. The kid had grabbed Charlie, but the cat wasn't having it. Charlie squirmed out of his arms, hissed at the boy, and bolted inside through the door. I stood up and walked toward the woman, telling her she couldn't just steal other people's cats. The kid started whining to his mother that he wanted the kitty. He burst into tears and threw a full tantrum right there on the driveway. Then the woman kicked and pushed me. I fell hard onto the cement. Pain shot through my side. She stood over me and threatened that I should give her the cat now or she would call the police herself. My grandfather stood up from his chair and spoke in a voice I'd never heard him use before. He told her she wouldn't need to call the police because he already had. He added that he also had her picture, so there was no need for her to run. Then he warned her not to kick his grandson or he would mess her up. The kid immediately ran behind his mother and hid. She just stood there with this big smug grin on her face, like she'd already won something. About 5 minutes passed in tense silence. Then 2 police cars pulled up. The first officer stepped out and started asking what the issue was, but the woman cut him off immediately. She told him that we had trespassed onto her property and stolen her cat. She said it with such confidence, like she believed her own lie. The second officer turned to my grandfather and asked for his side of the story. My grandfather told him he had a video if that would help. I watched the woman's grin melt right off her face. Her face turned red. I added that she had also kicked and pushed me. I lifted my shirt lightly to show the marks on my side where I'd hit the cement. The officer examined them carefully, then watched the video my grandfather had recorded on his phone. The first officer turned to the woman. He told her to put her hands up and said she was under arrest for assaulting a minor, attempted robbery, and trespassing. They handcuffed her right there in front of everyone. The kid started crying even louder. A man, probably the kid's father, showed up a bit later to pick up the boy. He looked at us like we were the ones who'd done something wrong, but he didn't say anything. He just took his son and left without a word. The second officer turned to my grandfather and asked if he wanted to press charges. My grandfather didn't hesitate. He said yes. My dad came to pick me up later. When I went inside to say goodbye to Charlie, I noticed he was acting different. He wouldn't go near the front door or look out at the yard. He seemed scared of the front yard now. I really hope it's only temporary and he gets over it soon. That cat means everything to my grandfather, and seeing Charlie scared broke my heart almost as much as what that woman did to us that day. About 6 years ago, my grandfather passed away and left me his old house trailer. I had been working 2 jobs trying to save up for my own place, so this felt like a blessing even though it needed work. The trailer had been sitting empty for almost a year, and I figured instead of letting it rot, I could rent it out and maybe make some extra money. The problem was I didn't have the cash to fix it up myself. The living room had no carpet, just bare subflooring. The hot water heater was disconnected, and the bathroom needed a toilet installed. Nothing major, but enough that I couldn't rent it as is. That's when I came up with what I thought was a smart idea. I posted an ad offering 2 months free rent in exchange for doing those 3 simple jobs. Put down carpet in the living room, hook up the hot water heater, and install the toilet I'd already purchased. Seemed fair to me. I'd save money on labor, and whoever moved in would get a head start without paying rent. A young couple responded pretty quickly. They had a newborn baby, maybe 2 months old, and they seemed eager for a place. We met at the trailer, walked through it, and they agreed to do the work. I explained it was month to month, no formal lease, and rent would be $450 after those first 2 free months. No security deposit either since they were doing the work. They seemed relieved and grateful. They moved in and actually did complete the work within that first month. The carpet went down, hot water heater worked, and the toilet was installed. Everything looked good. I figured I'd found decent tenants. Month 3 rolled around and I stopped by to collect rent. I greeted them and asked for the month's payment. The husband told me they were a little short because of the baby and everything. He asked if they could catch up next month. I understood. Babies are expensive and they were young. I agreed to wait. Month 4 came and it was the same story. Month 5, I drove by and noticed a different car in the driveway. Not the beat-up sedan they'd been driving, but the old truck he'd been working on when they moved in. It looked like it had a brand new engine. I stopped by and mentioned that I'd noticed the truck was running now. I said it looked great, but that I really needed to talk about the rent situation. I pointed out they were 3 months behind now. He casually explained that he'd put a new engine in the truck and it had cost him about $1,500, but he said it was worth it. I told him that $1,500 was more than the $1,350 he owed me in rent. His wife jumped in and told me they had rights. She said they knew the law and that I hadn't put in the furnace I promised, so they were on a rent strike. I asked what she meant by a rent strike, pointing out they'd never mentioned anything about that to me. I also reminded them it was still summer and they didn't need the furnace yet. She said it didn't matter and repeated that they weren't paying until I fixed it. That's when I started researching. Turns out they were right about one thing. Tenants can go on rent strikes for uninhabitable conditions, but they had to file it with the courts and put the rent money aside in an escrow account. They didn't do either of those things. They just stopped paying and spent the money on other stuff. I also learned something else. After 3 consecutive months of no rent, they were legally considered squatters in my state. That meant I didn't have to maintain the property and I could actually padlock it and deny them entry. The only reason I didn't was because of that baby. I'm not heartless. Fall came and went. I didn't put the furnace in. Let them figure it out since they wanted to play games. I saw them posting on social media about going out to eat, buying new electronics, and bragging about their tax refund. When I saw those posts about their tax refund, I stopped by again. I mentioned that I'd seen they got their refund and said it was perfect timing to catch up on rent. The husband admitted they got it but said they'd already spent it. His wife chimed in and repeated what she'd said before about knowing their rights. She said I couldn't evict them. I corrected her and explained that actually I could because they weren't on a legal rent strike. She brushed me off and told me to try it. She smugly pointed out that with COVID happening, there was an eviction ban anyway. She was partially right. COVID had hit and he'd gotten laid off. I gave them a break because of it. I'm not a monster. But when he went back to work a few months later, I tried again. I told them that now that he was working again, I needed the back rent. I pointed out they were over a year behind. The husband's response was to tell me to F off. He said they weren't paying me anything. That was it. I was done trying to be nice. I gave them 14 days notice. I told them they had 2 weeks to leave or I was filing for a formal eviction. I added that since he was on house arrest, he knew what that meant. That got his attention. I'd found out months earlier he was on house arrest for something. If he got formally evicted while on house arrest, it could violate his terms and send him back to jail. I was honestly trying to give him an out, a chance to leave quietly and avoid that. They left within the week. I figured I'd just cut my losses and move on. Then I walked through the property. Everything was gone. The carpet they'd put down, ripped out. The hot water heater, disconnected and taken. The toilet, gone. They'd even damaged the walls and floor, pulling everything out. I was furious. They'd gotten 2 months free rent for installing those things, and now they'd stolen them back. I filed for the formal eviction anyway, even though they'd already moved out. In my state, you can still get a judgment for rent owed and damages. We ended up in court a few months later. They showed up looking smug. The wife addressed the judge and explained that they'd gone on a rent strike because I didn't provide heat. She claimed that was uninhabitable. The judge asked if they'd filed the rent strike with the courts. The husband admitted they hadn't but said they'd told me about it. The judge then asked if they'd set aside the rent money in an escrow account. The wife said no and explained they'd needed that money for their baby. The judge didn't look impressed. Then they started attacking my character, saying I was a slumlord and negligent. The husband went on about how I was a terrible landlord who didn't care about tenants. He suggested I'd probably done this to other people too. That's when I spoke up. I told the judge that the husband had disclosed he was going to be on house arrest when he rented the property. The judge, who had been looking bored up until that moment, suddenly perked up and paid close attention. He asked them directly if what I said was true. He wanted to know if the husband had been on house arrest during the tenancy. The husband confirmed it was true but tried to argue it didn't matter. The judge corrected him and said it actually did matter. He explained that was a material fact that should have been disclosed. Then he announced he was ready to make his ruling. The judge awarded me 15 months of back rent at $450 a month. That came out to $6,750, plus $2,000 in damages for how they destroyed things when they ripped everything out. But that wasn't all. The judge said he had no choice but to turn the eviction over to the husband's parole officer. I walked out of that courtroom feeling vindicated. They'd played games, thought they were smarter than everyone else, and it had finally caught up with them. Fast forward to this month, almost a year after that court date, I got a notification that the husband's house arrest had been violated and he'd been arrested. Then I got a call that blew my mind. They actually had the nerve to ask me to speak on his behalf at his hearing. They wanted me to tell the judge he was a good person who just made mistakes. I didn't do it. I didn't show up, didn't write a letter, didn't lift a finger to help him. The ruling came down that his remaining 6 months of house arrest were now being converted to jail time. He'd be spending the next half year behind bars. On top of that, they now had a formal eviction on their record, which would make it nearly impossible for them to rent anywhere decent in the future, and they still owed me all that money from the judgment. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.